Something very telling is unfolding inside the Detroit Lions right now, and if you really pay attention to the details coming out of this offseason, you start to see a clear shift in how this team is trying to fix what went wrong last year. Because make no mistake, a 9-8 season after winning 15 games the year before and reaching the NFC Championship was not just a small step back, it exposed real cracks, especially right in the middle of the offensive line. And everything starts with what happened at center. When Frank Ragnow stepped away late in the 2025 offseason, it didn't just leave a hole on the roster, it disrupted the entire identity of the offense. This was a position the Lions hadn't worried about for years. Suddenly they were scrambling. They tried to adapt, drafting Tate Ratledge with the idea of possibly transitioning him inside, but he simply wasn't ready. Then came the decision to lean on Graham Glasgow, a respected veteran, a leader, someone who had experience at the position. But on the field, it just didn't work. The production dropped off significantly, and the numbers backed it up. The consistency wasn't there, the protection wasn't there, and the run game, which had been a strength, became unpredictable. There were flashes, sure, games where Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery looked unstoppable. But then there were games where everything stalled, where the offense couldn't establish rhythm, and it often traced back to issues right up the middle. You could see it as early as week 1. Miscommunication, missed assignments, breakdowns at the snap, the kind of problems that completely derail timing and confidence. And when the center position is unstable, it doesn't just affect one player, it spreads across the entire line. It limits what you can call, how creative you can be, and how much trust the quarterback has in the pocket. That's why the move to bring in Cade Mays is much bigger than it might seem at first glance. This isn't about signing a superstar, it's about restoring stability. Mays comes in as a young, ascending player who hasn't even fully hit his ceiling yet. Over the last 2 seasons, he's shown something that immediately stands out: reliability and pass protection. 0 sacks allowed across more than 800 pass blocking snaps. That's not just solid, that's exactly what this offense needed after last year's struggles. And what makes this even more interesting is how the coaching staff views him. Dan Campbell didn't hesitate to call him a centerpiece. Someone who can anchor the middle, keep the pocket clean for Jared Goff, and still give the offense flexibility in the run game. That's key because Detroit's identity isn't just about protecting the quarterback, it's about being able to run multiple schemes effectively. Zone, gap, pulling concepts, and not being limited by one weak spot. Mays gives them that possibility again. And here's the part that should really get your attention. This wasn't an overpay. 3 years, $25 million. That's a calculated investment in a player they believe is still getting better. A former 6th round pick who has already played multiple positions and brings experience from both guard and center. This is exactly the kind of move that doesn't dominate headlines but can quietly transform a unit, because if the center position stabilizes, everything else starts to fall into place. Now start thinking about the bigger picture. The Lions are heading into a draft where they hold picks 17 and 50, and the conversation has been dominated by offensive tackles, edge rushers, and defensive help. But what if the most important upgrade has already happened? What if fixing the middle of the line changes how urgent those other needs really are? There's also the possibility of a completely reshaped offensive line, new combinations, new chemistry, and potentially new starters depending on how the draft unfolds. Names like Tate Ratledge, Christian Mahogany, and others are all part of that equation, and if Detroit adds another high-level talent early in the draft, suddenly you're looking at a unit that not only recovers from last year, but could actually become stronger long-term. And that's where things get even more interesting. Because while everyone is focused on what the Lions will do with pick 17, whether it's a tackle, an edge rusher, or even a surprise selection, there's a real argument that the foundation has already been set with this move at center, that the front office identified the biggest weakness and addressed it before the draft even begins. So now the question shifts. Are the Lions building toward immediate impact in 2026? Or are they thinking even further ahead, shaping this roster for 2027 and beyond, while trusting that key upgrades like Cade Mays can already elevate the current team? And more importantly, do you believe this move alone can fix what went wrong up front last season? Or do the Lions still need to make a major statement in the draft to truly take that next step? Because when you start connecting all the dots, it becomes clear that this isn't just about one position being fixed. fixed. It's about how that fix changes the entire strategy heading into the draft, and this is where things really start to heat up. With the center position stabilized, at least on paper, the Lions suddenly have flexibility they didn't have a year ago. They're no longer forced into reaching for a specific need. Instead, they can actually let the board come to them, and that's exactly where teams like Detroit become dangerous. At pick 17, there are multiple directions this could go, and none of them feel locked in. Offensive tackle is still very much in play. Even with depth added in free agency, there are long-term questions, especially with the idea of protecting the future of the position. And if a high upside player is sitting there, someone with elite traits but still developing, that becomes very tempting. This front office has shown before that they're willing to bet on upside, especially when they're thinking 2 or 3 years down the line, not just the upcoming season. But then there's the other side of the ball. The edge rusher situation remains one of the most talked about topics around this team. Finding a true complement to Aiden Hutchinson has been an ongoing challenge. Even after adding a veteran presence, the feeling is still the same. They need more juice, more explosiveness, more consistency coming off the edge. The good news, this draft class offers depth at that position. The Lions might not feel pressured to grab one at 17 because there's a strong chance quality options will still be there at pick 50. And that's a key detail. Because if Detroit believes they can land a valuable edge rusher later, it opens the door for something unexpected in the first round. A player that maybe isn't the biggest need, but simply too talented to pass up. That's where names like a top-tier offensive lineman or even a defensive back could enter the conversation. And don't overlook the secondary. Injuries played a role there last season, and depth became a real concern. Adding a young, high-upside corner or safety could quietly become one of the smartest long-term moves they make, especially if a player with top 10 talent starts to slide due to injury concerns or inconsistencies. This front office has shown before they're not afraid to take calculated risks if the upside justifies it. So now you've got multiple layers to this strategy. You've got a team that fixed a major weakness with Cade Mays. You've got a roster that still has clear needs but isn't desperate at any single spot. And you've got a draft class that offers flexibility, especially at positions like edge rusher and offensive line. And then there's the philosophy behind it all. Brad Holmes isn't just drafting for today. Every decision is tied to what this roster will look like in the next 2 to 3 years. That's why you could see a pick that doesn't immediately make sense to everyone watching. A player who might not start right away but eventually becomes a cornerstone piece. And that's where fans sometimes get caught off guard, because it's easy to look at the depth chart and say, this is the need, fill it now. But inside that front office, the thinking is much bigger. It's about sustaining success, not just chasing it for one season. So imagine this scenario. The Lions go into draft night, and instead of forcing an edge rusher or a tackle, they take the best player available. Someone with elite traits, someone they believe can become a difference maker down the line. Then at pick 50, they circle back and grab an edge rusher from that deep second tier. Suddenly, you've addressed multiple areas without reaching, and you've strengthened both the present and the future. That's how smart teams operate. And it all goes back to that one move we talked about at the beginning. Because if Cade Mays truly becomes that stabilizing force in the middle, if he gives Jared Goff a clean pocket and helps unlock consistency in the run game again, then everything else becomes easier. The play calling, the rhythm of the offense, the confidence of the entire unit, it all changes. So now it's not just about whether the Lions improved. It's about how much that one improvement allows everything else to fall into place, and whether the front office takes advantage of that freedom in the draft to make a bold, long-term move that could define the next era of this team. And if that happens, if Detroit nails both the free agency upgrade and the draft strategy, are we looking at a team that's ready to get back to that championship level sooner than people expect? And here's where the conversation takes an even more intriguing turn, because once you accept that the Lions may not be locked into any single direction, you start to realize just how unpredictable this draft could actually be for Detroit. Think about it from the front office perspective. You've already addressed one of your biggest weaknesses with Cade Mays. You've added depth in key areas. You're not walking into draft night desperate. That changes everything, because desperation leads to reaching, and reaching is how teams make mistakes. The Lions right now are in a position to avoid that completely. So what happens if the board doesn't fall the way people expect? What if the top edge rushers are gone by 17? What if the tackles they value most are off the board? That's where this gets interesting, because instead of forcing a pick, the Lions could pivot to value, and that value might come from a position fans aren't even prioritizing right now. And one name mentioned in the discussion should really make you think about that possibility. A cornerback with top-tier talent who slipped due to injury concerns. A player that, based purely on tape, could easily be one of the best in the class. But because of missed time, because of uncertainty, he might still be sitting there when Detroit is on the clock. Now ask yourself this: do the Lions pass on that kind of talent just because it's not their biggest need? History suggests they might not. Because this regime has shown a willingness to trust their evaluations over public perception. If they believe a player can become elite, they're willing to take that gamble, even if it doesn't solve an immediate issue. And in today's NFL, where depth and versatility in the secondary are more valuable than ever, adding a high upside defensive back could end up being one of those moves that looks even smarter a year or two down the line. But let's not lose sight of the trenches, because that's still where this team is built. Even after signing Mays, even with young players developing, there's a real argument to be made that investing another premium pick in the offensive line wouldn't be overkill. It would be insurance. It would be about maintaining the identity that made this team successful in the first place. Dominance up front, controlling the game, protecting the quarterback, and creating opportunities in the run game. And if there's one thing Brad Holmes has consistently valued, it's building from the inside out. So the idea of taking another offensive lineman early, it's not just possible, it might actually be one of the safest long-term bets they can make. Now circle back to the edge position again, because even though it feels like a need, the depth in this class gives Detroit patience. They don't have to panic, they can wait, evaluate, and still come away with a player who fits what they're looking for. A guy who can rotate early, develop into a bigger role, and eventually become that reliable presence opposite Aiden Hutchinson. That's the balance they're trying to strike. Immediate contribution versus long-term upside. Filling needs versus maximizing value. And doing all of it without compromising the vision they've built over the last few years. And that's why this draft feels so important. Not because the Lions are trying to fix everything, but because they're trying to take the next step. The kind of step that separates a good team from a true contender again. The kind of step that puts them back in that conversation where expectations aren't just about making the playoffs, but about finishing the job. And it's all connected. The struggles at center last season, the decision to bring in Cade Mays, the flexibility it creates, the options it opens up